Hello and welcome back to another episode of Escaping Kerbin, where we play a Kerbal space program and try to get our lovely little green fellows onto another planet. Today we are just going to be doing one of the kind of standard missions that we've been doing throughout all of our series, and that is to set up a communications network. Of course, we use RemoteTech, so that means that our probes and any non-crewed vessels are going to need to take commands from the KSC, and so we're going to need to set up some satellites to make that happen. So today is all about setting up, it's actually a two-part. It's setting up a communications network around Kerbin, as well as around the Mun. But getting started, you can see we already have a bunch of science from our last episode. We did a flyby of the Mun, so I'm going to go here and look at all the different options. Basically everything in this node lineup is something that we're going to need either all at once or relatively soon. So first I'm going to go ahead and grab the electronics, so that way we can get better solar panels. It also opens up a new a new satellite communication dish. I also open up propulsion systems to give us smaller engines and fuel tanks to work with, so that way we can focus on making small satellites that don't take up too much space, so we can kind of maximize our efforts and get all three of them out there in the same vessel. Because if they're too heavy or they're too tall, we're not going to be able to fly it as a single craft. And if we have to make multiple trips to do our communications network, that just leaves a lot more room for error as far as getting the orbits in the wrong inclination or position or what have you. So we like to do it nice and simple by launching 3 satellites at once. So here I just kind of been talking through it. I've just been picking up any contract that I feel could be relevant to our upcoming missions. So here we are. We are going to build ourselves a satellite network. So it starts off with a probe core, a bunch of batteries, and 4 dishes. One is going to be Kerbin, pointed towards Kerbin. One's going to be pointed towards the Mun, one towards Minmus, and one towards any active vessel. And that should be able to cover us for this whole area. So here I am just trying to figure out how to put in a fuel tank while still keeping it fairly compact, and playing around with these new tank sizes that we have, because before opening the precision node, we would have only been able to have a 2.5 meter tank with the Beagle or the Terrier engine, and so it's not ideal for satellites, because honestly these satellites are probably never going to touch their fuel. We're going to drop them off in the orbit that they need to be in, and then from there they're just going to float around and stay where they're at unless we really do need to fix things. So really the fuel is only there to fix things, so that's why I don't mind having a fairly low delta V count. So here it is. This is the Fire Ant Communications K90, and then the K is of course standing for Kerbin, and then the 90 is representative that it's 90 million meters that it can cover. So since we don't have the communication network up yet, we have to put it up ourselves. We're going to be piloting this with a Kerbal, and then bringing that Kerbal back home when the mission is done. There are ways of setting up a communications network with RemoteTech, just using just probes in general, but it's a lot of fine-tuning your flight computer and having your burns be scheduled appropriately, and you're going to lose signal a lot of the time, and so it's just a big hassle. Right there, what I just did was I put a probe core into the lower stage, and the goal of that is to be able to bring that lower stage back down to the surface and hopefully recover it for some money, but primarily to avoid having space trash. So if it does burn up in the atmosphere, that's not too big of a concern, but ideally we just don't want to leave too much stuff hanging out. So of course we're going to do a simulation, since we have the ability to. Every simulation that we end up doing, it does cost us money, so we try to be very aware of that, especially the longer the simulation goes on for, the more money it costs, as well as the more difficult the simulation is. So if we were to simulate something on the surface of the Mun, that would be much more expensive than just the simulation of us taking off from the launch pad. So we have to be aware of that. And so yes, I'm just focusing on the thrust to weight ratio and seeing how this this craft will turn, and so far it's turning pretty well. I did forget to put on the Kerbal engineer chip, so we don't have any of that information, but we do have the pop-ups from MechJeb, giving us all the information that we need to see as far as apoapsis and periapsis and all that. So I see here that the fuel is definitely enough to get me into orbit. So I go ahead and plot that burn that brings us there. And it's a little bit of an elliptical one. I did forget a little bit that we were in the simulation, and so I'm just like, well, I might as well get it bigger. So go ahead and release that front half, but right now I want to focus on this back half and bring it back down to the planet. The front half will be fine. It's not going to deorbit itself or anything. So we go ahead and make a maneuver at our apoapsis, basically just on the other side of the planet, so we can attempt to aim to land back near the KSC. And, you know, just using a little bit of the fuel that I had left, just make ever so slight adjustment to our trajectory, and that'll be enough to bring us back. There is no control right now because we don't have a satellite system up, so the only way that we can get control is a direct connection to the KSC. And we're just, we're not going to get that. So our lifter stage, our booster or whatever, is now uncontrolled in a descent back to the planet. It's most likely just going to collide with the surface or burn up in the atmosphere. So I thought about just going back to the other craft and just keep going. And then I remembered, oh, this is a simulation. You know, we don't need to actually complete the mission here. We're not trying to set up the satellites into their location and spend an absolute fortune on a simulation that tells us what we already know, and that is how to do it. What we'd like is a simulation on whether or not it's possible in the first place. So this simulation, and I will stop saying that word, I swear, but this is all about whether or not I can pilot a booster all the way back. And we were not able to get it to the KSC. And in a moment, we're going to look on a map and show you just how far we were from the KSC. But we managed to not break up in atmosphere. And then right there, as soon as we looked at the map and we saw that we were close enough, we somehow managed to gain connection again. So I go ahead and kill the flight computer's hold, and I try to point myself retrograde. I get MechJeb's landing window open, and that gives me my suicide burn calculation. So now the mission is back on. I'm very excited. I haven't done very much probe core controlled booster landings before, so this is also just a test for my own ability. And then right there we hit the speed and drop down just enough to not destroy ourselves. So there we go. However, the following footage of where I get the craft that we just created lifted off the ground and into orbit, and then I got all the satellites in place, only to realize that I wasn't recording my footage at all. So as you can see here, I've got three crafts, two of which are those satellite cores, and then the other one is the crude Kerbal craft that has the last satellite attached to the top of it. I was very disappointed that I wasn't able to capture that footage, and so only what you see here is me putting the last satellite into place. As you can see, they're triangulated enough. You know, it's not a great network, but it'll do for now. So yeah, so I go ahead and put myself back into the appropriate orbit, and then we just separate that satellite and go ahead and rename it. It's the K90 number 3, Roman numeral 3, to signify that it's satellite number 3 in the system. So yeah, so now that that is in place, we are going to bring our Kerbal home. And we just time warp a little bit to separate from the other craft so we don't hit it when we turn around. And instead we hit it with our engines. We should have just time warped just a little bit longer to get that separation, but nonetheless, it doesn't bump our satellite too far out of position, so we're doing all right. There we go. So we switch back control to the crude part of the craft, and now we just have to bring our orbit down a little bit so it's not so high, so we can have a nicer re-entry. So I go ahead and bring the orbit, the periapsis, to just above 70,000. And then I plot in another maneuver, which brings us once more down to a reasonable just above the Kármán line orbit. And I'm not going to have enough fuel to complete this burn, so I made sure that I was within the atmosphere by the time the burn is completed. So therefore, even if it takes us multiple passes, we'll be sure that we're coming back down to the planet, because the aerobraking forces of that is going to be enough to bring our mass back down due to gravity. So yeah, so I'm in the atmosphere burning right now. I go ahead and turn to the side and kick off the lower stage, and then return my craft to the holding retrograde. And Joust Kerbin, I think that's how you pronounce it, Joust, doing just fine, happy as a clam. Looking forward to landing and ending this mission, because it was about a week-long mission for them, so I'm sure coming back to home soil will be very nice. Joust was only the second Kerbal in space for our agency, but had a great mission to do that's going to further our agency's career extraordinarily. Having communications network not just above Kerbin, but above the other moons as well, is going to bring us a lot closer to our goal. And and we're gonna start to launch rovers and exploratory probes and things like that. We'll be able to have control of them the whole time, and it's gonna be great. Golden age of our space agency. And Joust, you are to blame. So here we are. We land relatively safely. It was a little bit harder than I wanted, but we only had one parachute. So I go ahead and just do a little bit of science, a little EVA report, a little crew report. Struggle to get back into the pod, and then we go ahead and take it home. So because I didn't hit record, I felt pretty bad. So I decided to combine this episode with the next one, where we install, basically it's the same thing, where we install a communications network around the MUN. But this time I'm going to show you more of it. But real fast, before we can do any of that, we need to gather just a little bit more science to unlock a part. So here we are, we get our experiments around the KSC contract completed, where we do very specific experiments in each of the specific locations. A lot of people will tell you in the beginning, to just get a rover and grab every single piece of science from every location, and that is a great way of getting a bunch of early science. But I like one of the contract packs that I have has these contracts, this particular contract where you get it around the KSC. Here's the one I end up going for: general construction. After all that looking, I go for general construction and maneuverability. Just sink my points in there. But anyways, the contract itself gives you money to do those experiments. So all you got to do is just keep doing the experiments, keep doing the contract when it comes up, and eventually you'll have all the science from all the different locations, and you'll have been paid for it. So now that we're taking this, we're taking basically the same vehicle, except we're going to add a little bit more fuel on the upper stage, fuel and thrust on the upper stage, that will take us to the MUN, and then utilize the rest of the fuel to make all the maneuvers that we need to make in order to get the network into place. And because it's a little bit heavier, I throw on some solid rocket boosters onto the side to give it a little more oomph on takeoff. So that way we don't have to waste as much of our fuel in the lower stage, just getting ourselves upright. And I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit through each part of this process. I do want to include more since the footage was lost, but I also want to cut out some of the stuff that we see all the time. So there you go. There's the solid rocket boosters separating, and they did have parachutes on them, and we will later go through and look at the stage recovery mod, and I'll show you that one of them was recovered. I think that little explosion down there is what happened to the other one. So there you go. So here we are, just getting ourselves to the right altitude. This wasn't as clean of a takeoff as the previous two, the simulated one and the actual one for the Kerbin satellites, but we did pretty well. And we open ourselves up, and it's time to deploy. This will make sure that we not only maintain connection to the KSC and everything by activating all those dishes, but we will also be maintaining connection to the sun with our solar panels. Here I am just activating the auto chutes, the real chutes, parachutes. They're gonna all open at a specific altitude instead of a specific air pressure. Because this one, we took the probe core off the lower stage here and decided to just utilize it as much as possible and then just dump it before we circularize. So there we go. And so that will be coming back down into the atmosphere, and so long as it doesn't burn up, it will, its chutes will pop open appropriately, and we will recover the funds for that stage. So here we are, just making a burnout to the mun, using a precise maneuver to bring ourselves in. And then I realized I'm probably at a wrong inclination, so that's why I was having such trouble lining it up. And so I decided to take an extra step, as one would normally do for min-miss. We are going to just do for the mun to make sure that we are lined up properly. So we get ourselves pointing anti-normal, and then very shortly we will burn. And this is all being done by flight computer, so it's very precise. I don't have to worry too much. As long as the time to burn is low enough, then my precision will be accurate. So there we go. We make our we plot our maneuver out, and as you can see, we are perfectly equatorial, and that will be good for us. So we go ahead and get our apoapsis, technically our periapsis, but what our apoapsis to our orbit will be, we go ahead and get that out to about 900 kilometers. I think these antennae are rated for more. I could probably have it at a wider orbit, but I feel just under a million meters is going to be fine. So now, sadly, we're having to do our burn on the dark side of the planet. And as you can see there, we got all three engines firing happily. Go ahead and speed up this maneuver for you. And you'll see that we come in ever so gently right on the mark. We just have to do a slight bit of micro adjustments, so we go ahead and bring it on in. There we go. And so now we plot out the circularization burn, and we are headed for the mun. And I go ahead and get myself lined up with the maneuver. We're trying not to time warp too quickly because we don't want anything to happen. We still do have a Kerbal aboard, and an impact would be devastating. So we're all lined up, and we're getting ready to burn our trigade and grab ourselves into the gravity well of the mun. It doesn't actually take all that much. We're looking pretty good on our fuel supply, because even though it seems relatively low, we have fuel ducts going, and so we will be refilling our primary stage first. So I go ahead and bring my adjust my throttle again. Just get it down as low as possible so I can get the most accurate push. I don't know why that screen or that little dialogue is stuck on the screen. So yeah, so in order to just get the minimal amount of thrust, I decided to turn off 2 of the 3 engines and only fire through the center one, and then that gives me a little enough thrust that I burn for long enough that I feel like we can gain some serious accuracy with that. And adjust my inclination just ever so slightly, because I want to do that before separating the satellites. I return the thrust limiters back to the right places. And if you've noticed, I plotted a maneuver to bring down my my apoapsis, but I didn't let go of the satellite beforehand. So all I did was just ruin my orbit. So now I have to go around 1 extra orbit and undo what I just did, so that way I can release my satellite. I go ahead and name it the MUN 91, Roman numeral 1, and then so now I go and make the maneuver where I lower my apoapsis so that way I can lower my orbit so I can speed up. That is how it goes. The lower the orbit, the closer to the planet, the faster it's going, even though relative to each other, it's actually going slower. But again, better people than I can explain that better than I can. So here we are. We are now speeding up against the other satellite, and we're trying to separate ourselves up enough to make it look like a triangle. And I think I have it right here. I mean, I used a piece of paper to try to gauge whether or not I was lined up, but I still feel like I could have been better on that. So we go ahead and line that up there. I time warp ahead so that way we could separate our satellite in sunlight so we can see what we're doing. I name it the MUN 90 number 2. Then we go ahead and time warp ourselves away from it. And once more we lower our orbit so we can speed up against the other 2. And then as you see here, I plotted my maneuver because I felt like that was a good triangular position, but once I got to the maneuver I realized just how sharp of a triangle that was, so I decided to cancel the maneuver and go around a little bit more, and this was starting to frustrate me because I do also have life support, TAC life support on, so I can't just spend a whole year in space just trying to get the perfect orbit. Right, I have to, at some point I have to bring my Kerbal home. So here we are, we're just traveling around again. I decided to half the distance so I wasn't going as fast, which helped me slow down a little bit right when I needed to. So now we're in a relatively triangular orbit. One of them is very shallow, and so it could be a weak connection, but I think for the time being that should hold us now. Eventually I'd like to have a polar orbit to this communication network, but we'll get there. And apparently it takes very, very little to escape Kerbin at this point. Like, I barely tapped on the metaphorical gas, since we're only plotting the maneuver, but I barely tapped on the gas, and I was headed out, so it's interesting. So now look at my craft as I go and I plot this, or as I make this burn. You'll be able to see the shadow of that little piece of debris that's just hanging out right there. But then you see something a little more. So there it is. There's the debris. And then there is one of our satellites from way out, just casting a shadow, and it startled me. I honestly thought that we weren't alone. So we come in here and we go ahead and plot our return. We realized that we could probably utilize another flyby of the Mun to slingshot ourselves into a lower orbit. So we went ahead and turned our thrust limiter back up to 100% throttle. So we go ahead and jettison our side tanks, and now we have a fully fueled last stage that'll be able to lower our orbit and bring us back down to the surface. And our plotted maneuver somehow recollided with the Mun and sent us on a collision course. So now we have to correct that, turn it around, and get ourselves back to the orbit that we wanted. So go ahead and do that, and that brings us a flyby, but at least we're no longer going to hit it. But it does bring our overall orbit very high, which is not encouraging. So we go ahead and plot in a maneuver to bring us back down to a sensible height. It's going to be a lot of our fuel, but that's the whole point of having a full final stage. And for some reason I missed the maneuver. I don't know why. I was focusing on the Mun, and because of that we went out to the far ends of our orbit, and our Kerbal died of air toxicity. That wasn't it wasn't that she didn't have enough resources. There was enough resources. It wasn't that there was too much waste in there. What it was is that we didn't have an air scrubber on there, and that is technology that we just don't have at the moment. So there wasn't really anything I can do. I wanted to see if I could at least get the ship home just using the flight computer, but I hadn't programmed that into the flight computer by the time that she had died. So it will be a floating coffin around our agency's neck for quite some time. But as always, we take a moment to remember our fallen Kerbals. In here, the graveyard at the island runway, where we will honor their memory as we continue to make progress for all of Kerbal kind. Well, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked it, please consider giving me a like, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.